Collaborate with Prince William. Many of the things Prince William says in this are things that people and sources have told us about music, him and his way of thinking. We watched him up close. I thought it was fascinating to hear him say that something had happened that everyone had been silently preparing for, yet when the time came, it still managed to leave everybody speechless. In an instant, the day that historians, royal watchers, and common people around the world had been looking forward to for years came to pass. The world froze when Prince William, who had spent decades training in the wings, emerged as king rather than prince or heir presumptive. This is the account of that moment, what preceded it, what happened during it, and what the remarkable events both inside and outside the palace gates told us about the future of the British monarchy. Because King William V's first public appearance was more than just a formality. It was a declaration. It was an indication. And according to all accounts, it was a tearful time for one specific household associated with the royal family. There are historical events that clearly distinguish a before and an after. The statement was delivered with a tone of subdued solemnity that has been honed over generations by the British aristocracy. Succinct, deliberate, and deeply definitive. Charles III, the king, had died. After Queen Elizabeth II's death in September 2022, the reign had ended. William Arthur Philip Louis thus became King of the United Kingdom and the 15 other kingdoms that acknowledge the British crown by virtue of the long-standing and unbroken custom that has controlled British succession for more than a millennium. At that time, neither a vote nor a ceremony were necessary. In an instant, the land's customs and laws made it such. There was no more Prince of Wales. William V was able to rule without a crown. He was one already. But the world was waiting to see him, hear him, and see the face of the guy who would now be in charge of an organization that had withstood scandals, abdications, world wars, and revolutions in order to determine what kind of monarch he meant to be. His first public appearance at that time was unprecedented in contemporary royal history. From the start, those who anticipated the rigid formality of earlier royal changes were taken aback. William did not come out of the massive palace doors, encircled by a wall of private secretaries and courtiers who were acting out committee-written scripts. Rather, he emerged with Catherine at his side, and the two of them moved with a common sense of purpose and serenity that caught onlookers right away. The intentional simplicity of his presentation was recognized by royal commentators viewing live streams. Yes, he was dressed appropriately, but he lacked the theatrical distancing that has frequently been associated with royal visits on grave occasions. He stared straight into the cameras. Even his most devoted followers were taken aback by the steadiness of his voice when he finally spoke. He acknowledged his dad. After paying tribute to his grandmother's history, he took a step that would influence everything that came after. He addressed the British people directly as a man speaking to fellow residents of a country he loves and plans to serve, rather than as a sovereign addressing subjects. He spoke simply. He maintained his cool while expressing real emotion. He made it apparent that he intended to carefully and methodically manage the monarchy he was inherited, fully aware that trust must be earned rather than taken for granted. Commentators rushed to make analogies. Some went all the way back to the early broadcasts of Elizabeth II. Others took a closer look at times when British kings had to make decisions that affected their legacies and confronted a national crossroads. However, the majority concurred that William's initial acts as king had a distinct personality of his own. It wasn't undignified, but it was personal. It was contemporary without demeaning custom. One prominent political journalist who was watching from a studio concluded that it was the start of something truly novel. This moment's tale cannot be told without also sharing her story. Many who have followed her trip were profoundly moved by the calmness with which Catherine, now Queen Catherine, stood next to her husband. This woman had experienced her own severe health crisis, months of uncertainty and recuperation, and a well-publicized struggle with the burden of disease and expectation at the same time. That incident had already altered her, making her somewhat quieter but more determined when she returned to public life. And here she was, on the day that everything changed, moving ahead rather than backward, standing at the center of history rather than disappearing into the background. Everyone who was paying attention understood the symbolism. This would not be a monarchy with a queen consort who waved and grinned while keeping her thoughts to herself. This would be an obvious and deliberate partnership. This has long been hinted at by royal sources. The couple's approach to the institution was consistently defined by those close to them in terms of a common vision and cooperative strategy. William's strategic intuition was enhanced by Catherine's perspective on life outside the palace gates, which was derived from her upbringing and years of effort to establish sincere relationships with charities and communities. When taken as a whole, they stood for something the monarchy had not often been able to convey in the past: coherence. On that first day, her presence next to William was a statement in and of itself. The new monarchy would not be an isolated endeavor. It would be constructed by two individuals who had chosen each other, raised a family together, overcame extreme adversity together, and were now getting ready to take the helm together. While the public watched William and Catherine with a mix of respect, optimism, and silent grief for what had been lost with Charles's death, something else was going on behind the scenes that was, by all accounts, considerably more unvarnished. The atmosphere in the home associated with Camilla, the woman who had worked for years to become queen consort and had finally worn that title with obvious pride, was one of deep sadness and something far more complex. The mood was dismal, according to people acquainted with the incident. This was more than just mourning over a king's passing, even though that anguish was genuine and evident. It was also the sadness of a chapter coming to an end, of witnessing the irreversible shift in the institution's center of gravity from a certain point of view with its own complicated emotions. Camilla had battled for a long time to gain respect and dignity both within the organization and in the court of public opinion. After years of animosity, she eventually gained some public acceptance. Even her detractors acknowledged the dedication with which she had worn her crown and performed her duties. However, the mathematics of royal life underwent a radical transformation as soon as William assumed the throne. The new king and his queen, rather than the man she had married, would now decide her influence, access, and everyday life within the institution. According to some stories, Camilla and Catherine's relationship had been tense for a while. People in her social circle spoke of tears, not political or theatrical tears, but the tears of a person facing a future that is drastically different from what they had anticipated. A sort of grief that combined personal loss with a growing awareness of altered circumstances was evident, with family members assembled and silent conversations taking place in spaces that cameras would never be able to access. You need to know a little bit about Camilla's past in order to comprehend why this specific transition is so emotionally charged for people who are close to her. One of the most difficult and contentious paths in contemporary royal history led her to become queen consort. It was neither inexpensive nor simple. She operated on the periphery of formal royal life, endured years of public disfavor, and was primarily characterized in the public's mind by her relationship with Princess Diana and the significance of that relationship. It took time and consistent work to restore her public image. She stood next to Charles when he was crowned king, marking the end of a decades-long odyssey. It was a time of validation for her family and supporters. The title was accurate. It was a real position. It was genuine recognition. Now that William has ascended to the throne and Charles has left, the hard-won position changes. Decisions taken by the next king and his counselors will largely determine what stays and what changes. Prior to his passing, Charles reportedly expressed his desire for Camilla to keep her position and privileges inside the organization. However, optimism and assurance are not the same thing, especially when the person in charge has a distinct idea of how the monarchy should develop in the future. All of this accumulated weight was reflected in the tears that Camilla's relatives shed. Both the sadness over Charles and the fear of what was ahead were sincere. William's first appearance as king was examined in terms of both what he said and what he decided not to say. He was meticulous, methodical, and exact in a way that implied each word had been carefully considered. Regarding members of the royal family, he did not make any explicit guarantees. He said nothing that might be interpreted as confirming the admission or exclusion of any specific member of the inner circle of his rule. This was a communication method in and of itself. It addressed the strategic intellect that many who know him will have long said is essential to his personality. He refused to let personnel announcements or disputes characterize his first day as king. He made it clear that his priorities were service, the task at hand, the people of Britain and the Commonwealth countries, and proving right away that this would be a monarchy focused on its obligations rather than its conflicts. However, attentive observers took note of both the presence and the absence. He always used rhetoric that focused on responsibility, openness, and relevance while discussing the future. For a man getting ready to update an old institution, these word choices seem deliberate. They give a direction signal. They allude to a kingly ideology that considers that public support must be continuously justified rather than merely inherited, and does not take anything for granted. These comments have ramifications that should be carefully considered by members of the extended royal family, who have historically profited from the institution's propensity to control and protect rather than expose and confront. It was interesting to see how people responded to William's initial appearance, both in the real world and online. Although there were sizable and courteous audiences present, the atmosphere was different from that of earlier royal changes. Undoubtedly, there was sadness for both Charles and the end of another era in a monarchy that has grown deeply ingrained in British culture. However, there was also what onlookers called cautious hope. According to a number of recent surveys, William is among the more well-liked members of the royal family. He has a foundation of true public goodwill thanks to his carefully constructed public persona, which includes his long-standing dedication to causes related to mental health, environmental conservation, and housing. His Earthshot Prize project has given him credibility with younger audiences who occasionally find it difficult to relate to the organization he now oversees. Additionally, the pair experienced genuine warmth as a result of the public's pity and devotion upon Catherine's return from her health issues. People had saw her go through a challenging situation and witnessed how gracefully she handled it. If anything, that event had made her more relevant to regular folks going through their own challenging times. A foundation that many observers saw as genuinely sturdy was built by the combination of William's extensive preparation and obvious seriousness of purpose with Catherine's well-earned public affection. Strong yet not assured, not impervious to the mistakes and disputes that all monarchy eventually encounter. Naturally, William inherits more than simply a crown and a title. He also inherits a complicated and frequently paradoxical organization that manages the pragmatic demands of the contemporary world while carrying significant symbolic weight. From the fallout from Sussex's departure to the controversy surrounding Prince Andrew, the monarchy he enters has faced significant challenges in recent years. These challenges range from concerns about the institution's relevance and cost to more general international discussions about the meaning of Commonwealth relationships in a post-colonial era. When William took the lead, none of these difficulties went away. If anything, his ascent gives them all a fresh sense of urgency since there is now a clear window of opportunity for change. A new monarch may decide to simply uphold inherited structures or take use of the opportunity presented by transition to change things. The latter appears much more feasible based on what is known about William's style of leadership. He has spent years not only preparing to be king but also carefully considering what kind of monarch to be, according to royal experts who have observed him attentively. In an effort to create a vision of kingship that is answerable to the present rather than merely inherited from the past, he is said to have interacted with individuals from outside the conventional palace bubble, solicited opinions from corporate executives, community activists, and young people. This does not imply a complete revolution. He cares about the institution's stability and knows that change and continuity need to be properly balanced. However, it does mean that William V's monarchy will probably feel very different from previous ones in terms of its organizational structure, public participation, communication style, and willingness to face challenging issues rather than sidestep them. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex's presence, no matter how far away, cannot be ignored in any discussion about the new reign. In some regions of the world, the institution's reputation suffered greatly as a result of their departure from royal life and everything that followed, which also caused rifts among the family. For a while now, people have been guessing about what kind of relationship, if any, King William will pursue with his brother. Royal specialists generally agree that William is unlikely to make this a pivotal moment in his early reign. The substantive agenda he wishes to pursue would be overshadowed if he began his reign with either a spectacular severance or a dramatic reconciliation. He'll probably take a cautious and quiet approach. The door may not stay dramatically open or securely closed. Roles and titles shall be chosen with the institution's best interests in mind, not personal grudges. It's evident that William has not forgotten the recent events or the public remarks that made the situation so challenging. By nature, he is a person who values loyalty and finds it hard to forgive betrayal. However, he also recognizes that the institution comes first and that decisions made based on feelings rather than institutional reasoning can lead to more issues than they resolve. Let's return to the person whose home was hidden from the cameras during those initial amazing hours. In this new chapter, what truly happens to Camilla? In a monarchy headed by a king with whom she has apparently had a difficult relationship, what part, if any, would she play? According to sources, King William will be cautious when answering this query. Although they are not legally enforceable, his father's purported wishes are significant. Public perception is another issue. It would be detrimental to the perception of a calm and respectable new rule to be perceived as treating an elderly woman cruelly, even if their relationship is tense. However, it is highly likely that Camilla will have different access, advantages, and a different platform in the future than she did under Charles. She won't be queen anymore. She will be a character from a prior chapter, one whose presence at significant institutional moments will require careful management due to her complicated past. This is understood by those who are close to her. It was not innocence that caused the tears to flow in the hours after William's initial appearance. They were born with a complete understanding of the significance of this change. Her status and the universe she had meticulously created around herself have completely shifted. Furthermore, the person in charge of its restoration is not someone whose first instinct is to defend her own interests. The intensity of the current events often obscures another aspect of this story. Prince George, the oldest of William and Catherine's 3 children, assumed the throne as soon as his father was crowned king. These kids are growing up in situations that are both simpler and more complicated than what their parents had to deal with. Compared to earlier royal generations, they are growing up with parents who are more emotionally conscious, more actively involved in their upbringing, and more dedicated to providing them with some semblance of a typical childhood. William has discussed this in detail and on numerous occasions. Whatever else his reign achieves, he is adamant that it will include raising children who are prepared, sympathetic, and grounded, and who will deal with the unique difficulties of being royal without being in direct line in the same manner. One of the less well-known but no less significant aspects of William's reign will be how he handles his children's public appearances, the roles they play as they get older, and how the institution supports their growth. Thus, we find ourselves at the start of something that historians will later evaluate with the advantage of perspective and distance. The world has seen King William V for the first time. He's spoken something. He has stood next to his queen. He has revealed to the world the shape of the future. Compared to its predecessors, this design is more streamlined, purposefully modern, strategically managed, and clearly focused on service and responsibility. Some members of the extended royal realm are left feeling worried about their future by this shape, and at least one household is brought to tears by it. However, it is also a shape with genuine potential. Because of its ability to adapt, absorb change, and find new methods to stay relevant, the British monarchy has withstood all that history has thrown at it. William has a deep understanding of this. His period of preparation has enabled him to study it, consider it, and get ready for it with a completeness. William V's era is no longer far off. The globe and the present, who's seen him advance on that remarkable first day, will be watching everything that comes after with the understanding that what they are seeing is actually the start of something new rather than merely the continuation of something old. The king, who has been waiting for this moment his entire life and intends to make it count by every available indication, will continue to build a monarchy for the 21st century and beyond day by day, decision by decision. The tears will dry, and the grief will fade into memory.